the meeting. So I think we may start, and I will probably, unless Jim wants to take the lead while I'm fixing this audio settings. So this is an interim meeting for the ACE working group. I guess you are pretty aware of the not well. If not, please read those. And the agenda is the one we provided in the email. So I guess that we may start with the draft IETF ACE MQTT TLS profile. And I would like maybe Sinjan to start presenting it.
Hello, I did send out some slides, but yeah, okay, I was going to ask that, whether you had seen the slides I've shared this week.
Well, it's not a problem.
If not, it's not important. I can just talk over.
So, by the way, do we have anyone taking notes? Or well, it's very inconvenient for me because I'm not hearing anyone. So I'm wondering, Jim, do you want to take that over?
Sure.
Or am I trying to reconnect myself? Or
yeah,
can't figure out what is going on.
I'm trying to remember exactly where the Ethernet addresses are at the moment. It's where the Etherpad tool is. Well, I'll just go ahead and take notes offline.
This is putain de merde. Okay, maybe that's this.
I don't seem to have your slides, so why don't you just go ahead and start with your presentation?
Sure, no problem. It was a few slides anyway. I was giving updates on what changed since Singapore. So just looking at my own slides in my own computer so that I remember the key points I want to raise. So since Singapore, we submitted the third version 3, which aimed to address some of the discussion that was raised during the Singapore meeting, and also Jim's comments on the draft. The major, I think, change was clarification on how the TLS exporter was described, and we now have agreed on a name, exporter ACE sign challenge, which would be used to create a random nonce so that the client can do proof of possession to the broker. And this was kind of the necessary step for MQTT version 3.1 to be able to do the proof of possession. We've also clarified the text, clarified the use of auth info topic, tried to explain a little bit about more on giving permissions using wildcards for the scopes. And that was basically the majority of the changes. In the past week, we continued to receive comments from Jim and Daniel. And in the last case, majority of the comments are focusing on how the client authenticates to and authorizes to the broker. And on Jim's recommendation, if you remember, we've introduced to the spec 4 ways to do that, to do this based on choices on TLS and MQTT. And one of Daniel's comments was that in the case where the TLS was anonymous and MQTT, there was no authentication, we allowed that case for topics that didn't require any permissions to publish or subscribe to, or the offset info topic as the first step towards an ACE style authentication. He was wondering whether that should be included in the options and whether the wording should be changed. The other thing that I would like to have feedback on is that the use of multiple tokens. The way that we've described this in the draft is that if a token is being submitted through the TLS handshake, as well as for the TLS handshake, as well as in the connect message for MQTT, we basically only consider the latest token, and any permission that has been granted in the previous case of token validation is overwritten. We always consider the latest token, and we kind of stick to that for the cases when a token can be submitted by the client during a persistent connection. After the connect, the client can re-authenticate and by sending a token again, and we kind of again overwrite the previous token. So this is another thing that I would like to get workgroup opinion on, how to handle multiple tokens. The second issue that I would like to raise is that we've kind of settled on certain lengths in terms of the way the exporter sign challenge is used in the TLS, that it's 32 bytes. Another way of doing the proof of possession that we described that can be used in version 5 of MQTT was to allow a challenge response flow where the broker can initiate it by sending a nonce, and the client adds its own nonce, and then they do proof of possession over those 2 nonces. We kind of settled on 8 bytes, but as Jim raised, we do not actually have to do 8 bytes. We already consider TLS as the underlying transport security, so we can afford to use larger nonces, and that is something that I would like to also get workgroup opinion. Should we stick to the workgroup's decision on 8 bytes, or should we extend it? Other things that open issues, other discussion points is will be based on particularly Jim's and Daniel's comments so far. We're also welcoming others to join in giving us comments and feedback. Majority of the stuff that's remaining at the moment is on formatting clarifications on certain data that needs to be passed via MQTT messages. And the examples of these include, how do we pass AS creation hints? We should settle on a format on that. We should be clear on how the authentication data is omitted when we are permitting AS discovery. We should be very clear on the auth data format, etc. So these are the things that we will be specifying for the version 4. We've omitted the discussion on payload encryption for the published message, leaving that to the PubSub document. And a discussion on these have started in the workgroup mailing list. So we won't be providing any solutions or saying anything more than what we write in the spec at the moment for that point. Yeah, so these are the main issues I wanted to raise. If there are any other questions or points that I should raise, please let me know.
We're getting some pushback right now from Ben on using only 8 bytes for the OSCORE nonces. So I'm pretty sure we want to at least go to 128-bit nonces.
Okay. That's perfectly fine. For the, we've also discussed it earlier, and I think in my case particularly for the TLS MQTT, we can make that assumption that the client and the should be able to work with larger sizes. So that I do not see a problem for this particular spec, because we already make the assumption of a slightly powerful client that can handle TLS. The other thing that I would like to clarify is that if we are fine with the TLS exporter sizes, you mentioned, Jim, that could be also defined as variable, the auth data, as long as we are clear on the formatting. Should we stick with 32 bytes, or should we be basically considering something variable? That could be negotiated between in the deployment.
Oh, sorry, I muted myself. The variable length stuff I was looking at actually had to do with the challenge response items, I think, but also with the length of tokens. Those were the two things that I was actually looking at. Because if you send back a variable length response nonce value from the client plus your signature, then you can't parse it. I think we're fine using a fixed length value from the exporter, unless we want to say, use whatever length you need to fill out the buffer. I mean, if you're doing a 512-bit signature, do we want to have more than 128 bits for signing? Would be the question on that.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I do not think so. I think the length that we settled with the 32 bytes and having a fixed size, I'm fine with going with that decision, actually. Just wanted to make sure that there's no other opinion that kind of says, no, we shouldn't be specifying and we should let variable. But if the work group is fine with the length, then I'm also fine.
I think we'll probably send that one out to sector and see if we get any nasty responses on it.
Mm-hmm.
Another question I had, and I raised a comment, and response was that you were basically coming back and forth with that. Is the use of TLS exporter, but I think it's only in one case. So is that something we want to clarify in that now, or?
Yeah, that could be something that we can discuss now. You're right, Daniel. You were asking in this response challenge one, I kind of let the RS and the client generate random nonsense, not binding it to the TLS exporter, and I gave the option of TLS exporter for the MQTT, the other method, which could be supported by MQTT version 3.1. The reason for that is that some of the people that are implementing it gave a pushback about TLS exporters, and I had to admit that I wondered whether there should be an option that doesn't use a channel TLS exporter, where the RS is allowed to create its own random nonsense and the client. I'm wondering what the workgroup opinion is about that. Do we always try to use channel binding?
I'm not too worried about channel binding per se.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that you want to be able, especially on a re-authentication, to be able to use fresh values and not be tied to the same exporter value throughout the entire conversation.
Okay.
I mean, do we think that we want to worry about man in the middle, considering that we're validating the public key of who we're talking to? So basically,
I wasn't thinking there was a problem, but
I can't think of a problem offhand because we're doing public key validation or symmetric key validations on both sides.
The validation is performed. You mean using TLS or?
Yeah, I mean, the client has validated it's talking to the correct server over TLS.
Yeah.
And the server is validating this talking to the correct client. Using I mean, using the pop key.
Okay. So, but as far as I remember, also we are using the exporter in another section. Do we?
Yes, that's because that is because for MQTT version 3.1, I cannot it cannot support a challenge response flow. So the broker and the client needs to settle on is kind of a nonce to do the pop. So the best way was to rely on the TLS to do that. Before I was proposing things like using the random client ID, something from the payload, but there was pushback on that that might not be random enough and the client ID may be repeated over different sessions. So that's why we use TLS exporter to get that fresh value per connection.
Well, my opinion, but I mean, I don't have it's just my thoughts. So I mean, I don't want it to influence in one way or the other. Is that what I am personally thinking is that it's better to not rely on the capability of the, I think it's the client, to generate some nonce, and if we can use that on the TLS exporter, it's I would say it's better. In addition, that it provides a channel binding. That said, if you receive some pushback, well, it's but is that only for MQTT version 3 or?
No, for this particular version 5, when people do the response, the challenge response flow, that's the only part where people kind of said, you know, we're going to settle on that, and we prefer to that RS just generates its own nonces.
Okay.
I mean, I will note that the MQTT version that I am.
Yeah, we can do a mail on that maybe. Like, it's maybe an option for to channel binding on that if necessary. But again, as Jim said, when there's re-authentication, this has to be done anyway. And this is only MQTT version 5 capability, the re-authentication. And in the re-authentication, this has to be done with different nonces.
Yeah. So, I mean, basically what has to be balanced, I think, is the, do we provide the way the nonces are generated or not? And I think that's the main question we should ask and provide an answer to.
What do you mean by that?
If we use the exporter, you basically say this is how we generate. I mean, this is how the randomness is guaranteed. Otherwise, you just let the client to generate the nonce himself, and he can reuse the same fixed value, for example, or.
Well, both the client and the server are generating nonces as input to that challenge. So you can't. So you have to have two bad actors, not one bad actor.
Yeah. Okay. And what is the reason for not using the exporters then?
Freshness.
Okay. So it's actually a good reason not to use those if we want to have more freshness.
Yes.
So yeah, I think it. So it is everyone agreeing that it's better not to use those exporters?
Well, I don't have any problem with using the exporter on the first round.
Yeah. But that may make something more complex, does it? To have to distinguish between different rounds.
You cannot for the second and third as off on round of reauthentication, you cannot use the exporter. You can only use the exporter the first time round.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only time it's an option.
And does it worth to have a separate case for the first round, or?
Yeah, because it duplicates the 1.3, the 3.1 version.
Okay. Okay, so
I would say if we trust the non-scheme for the second and the third round, we can also use the same thing for the first round.
Yeah, no, I don't have any problems with that.
okay, so not using exporters at all might be the most straightforward solution, is it?
Just for this challenge response flow,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah.
So, okay, yeah, maybe that would be good because I suspect that's going to come back from SecDir reviews and so on. So the reason we don't use the channel bindings.
I think then I can add a comment on this why we support that basically.
Yeah, I think that's
I'll just raise the reauthentication.
Okay, any other question? Concerns? So hearing none, do you know when we will have a version 4?
Very soon, because I have I'm planning within 1 or 2 weeks to have the version 4.
Okay.
I did have noted all the comments I've received, and it's in the GitHub, and I do have a plan to resolve them. One question though, because I introduced this TLS exporter label, I was asking because I think it will be used generally in the working group. Is my document the right document to introduce that label? If it is, it's fine. I'm just opening the floor whether there would be an earlier document that has to register it.
My personal opinion, and this is purely a personal opinion, is that the labels should be application specific.
Okay.
That is, DTLS and GroupCom should not use the same label.
Okay.
Otherwise, you have an extremely theoretical way to move things between those two applications.
Okay.
And it's extremely theoretical enough. I don't think it's doable, but that's beside the point.
Marco here, I support this. In fact, we have an open point on ASP Group Common Score about defining its own exporter label.
Yeah. So what was the question? I mean, the document is defining an exporter label, and I mean, I don't really see how we could do otherwise.
It was used like a label for NA's sign challenge. So if these kind of, I was thinking, and I probably am wrong now that Jim said it should be application specific, and I'm thinking about it. I was just thinking that if a exporter, TLS exporter was used for that particular purpose, for that specific purpose for a sign challenge, maybe it's reusable across the different drafts who rely on that functionality. But yeah, maybe it should be application specific.
Yeah. I see that. Yeah, I agree with that. So it should be defined in that document. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, that's fine. So I think once this is my plan. Once we have version 4, I think this version 4 should be almost ready for a working group last call. So what I would like to is I have at least before we start that working group last call, a number of reviews, and then maybe have do we want to have a pre-review by the security directorate? I think it would be useful, but I don't know what people are thinking about it.
I think it makes sense to have a pre-review by the security directorate if we have specific questions.
Okay.
And we should probably sit down and talk about that.
Okay. Okay, so this is and I hope well, we will be at least the working group last call would have started by the IETF in Vancouver. So let's go to the next presentation. If anyone, if we don't have anything to say. Okay, so I think that's going to be Marco.
That's right.
So let me check. So I'm going to remove those. Do you see the screen?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, good. Thank you.
So we submitted this version 4 mid-January, first after the Singapore meeting, and it mostly focused on continuing on the restification process of the API of the KDC. Better shown in the next slide. Right. This is actually an updated slide from Singapore. Main changes. We clarified that GID, highlighted in yellow on top left, is not strictly speaking an identifier of the group or topic, but most properly its name, actually. So it has nothing to do with an actual cryptographic or security-related identifier, like the ID context of OSCORE. It's a pure name. And then we started to change especially methods and their handlers for the sub-resources to this fruit one. For instance, the ACE group GAD pub key resource related to the retrieval pub key. We changed the method post to fetch for the sake of retrieving the public keys only of some specified group members. In the last one, instead, ACE group GID node, that used to be just ACE group GID only, and the specific group member requesting for actions to the KDC was supposed to be identified by the particular secure session or channel they had. Following an input and a discussion from Jim, we decided instead to go for one further sub-resource per group member, where node there is essentially yet another name, plain name for the group member. So again, nothing to do with anything cryptographically related like a sender ID. And this means that practically every group member upon join has to receive such name, and that exact URI path of its concern is returned in the location path in the join response. But other than this, when it comes about this resource, we also revise the method and handlers it admit. And we introduced delete for an explicit leaving of the group. We redefined get, which is now about getting the same common group key material you can get with the get method on ACE group GID. plus also the current individual key material for that node, that for instance in GroupoScore is the sender ID. And what used to be get became put in order for that group member to ask for a new individual key material. So for instance, for a new sender ID in the group, there are cases for doing that. But of course, in this document, we are more general than that and try to be abstract. This was the main update, actually. If you switch to the next slide, it presents the same things in a slightly different fashion, and it's more convenient.
Also, quick question. Sorry, I haven't read the draft, but what exactly is the thing, the data format that is being put there?
That's up to the particular profile to define.
Ah, okay.
Yes. Yeah, a question I had is more convenient to ask here, actually, for the third bullet. Now it's about retrieval public keys, so all of them with get or selected one with fetch. We had a separate discussion with Jim for another draft we have in ACE defining the group manager for creating and configuring the group for an administrator. And we started to discuss of cases where, for instance, the signature algorithm changes, what to do in that case, other than brutal solutions like restarting the group from scratch or forcing everyone to leave and rejoin. A software solution can be that the current group members re-upload a new public key that is consistent with the new signature algorithm, for instance. Just in case we decide to go with that, would it be useful to have a put method here for doing so? So for uploading a new public key.
So that resource is really providing an overview over the whole group. You either get everything using get or you search in the collection using fetch. Mm-hmm. So putting something there, I would expect that the node ID would play a role there.
Well, you can still be identified through the exact session you have with the group manager, but we can otherwise have another sub-resource under the GID node path as an alternative. And that's really tied to that exact member.
I think that I would rather see that as part of a put on the GID node, because you need to do a pop, and you're probably going to want to roll over the group, the key group number. So you're probably going to want to issue new keys at the same time you change the signature algorithm.
Mm-hmm. So
I think that makes more sense to make that part of the be able to be part of the put to the group ID node, or to group ID/node.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Because of course, in case it has to be defined first of all here. Thanks. Okay. Next slide, please. Right. Then we took into account a number of comments we got from Jim that we also managed to discuss, by the way, right after Singapore. They were mostly on improving error dispatching and handling, the concept of node name that I mentioned before. In case upon joining the group member provides not a raw public key but an actual certificate, we clarify what we specify as URI. So the URI of the actual certificate, not of the repository. And then, as I mentioned before, we ended up using fetch for retrieving public keys of a set of nodes. There was, in fact, in Singapore, a discussion between having that as a fetch or a put, but we concluded with fetch. We also extended a lot and revised the list of requirements defined here that are expected to be fulfilled by profiles instantiating this draft. And well, related also to the document of the next presentation, we took out from there a lot of general content that was more appropriate to have here, and included it here in this document, in fact. Right, next slide, please. Okay, we have a number of open points that we should be able to discuss today, I think, and next steps for us are in fact taking care of those open points and continuing, because we have just started, to address comments we got from Peter on the list, as well as comments from Jim that we got today, in fact. Thank you, Jim. So next slide, please. And we have 4 open points we could think about. The first one is just to check that what we are doing is in fact fine. We are defining and registering a new content type, ACE group plus CBOR, to really distinguish between till when the token is posted, and that's pure ACE, so based on ACE plus CBOR messages, against what happens right after, where we are defining new parameters, whose names often are just as the names of other parameters we have. So of course we don't want to have collisions between the two domains, and in fact we are registering also our new synonymous parameters in a new registry we are introducing. So just to double check is in fact correct to register these parameters separately and to have them used in messages with a newly defined content format. Any problem with that? Is this correct?
So just to make sure I understand, so you're basically creating your own registry.
Yes, that was actually present already 1 or 2 versions ago. But then to make things properly consistent, we are also introducing a content format to use for messages with those parameters.
Yeah, I think it's good to split. I mean, that's my...
Okay, for the second point, that was something that at the very beginning of this, when we were still writing individual documents, we considered shortly to have a single access token indicating in the scope multiple topics or groups to join at once. It looked too complicated to do at the time with many more important things under definition. So we dropped that and we stick to a single topic or group per token. Now we were thinking to reconsider this and open the way for indicating in the scope of the same token multiple topics and groups. And sure, the devil is in the detail, but in principle, it should be about having arrays of some of the parameters we have already. And in general, the client is supposed to indicate, or that can be the case, multiple public keys in case he wants to use one public key in a different topic or group, but it can still indicate one only, and that would mean it intends to use that one in all of the groups it is joining. Do you see any issues with that?
I don't see any issues with having a token cover multiple groups, because that's just scope. I'm a little bit leery about trying to enroll in multiple groups at the same time, because you need to figure out how to return multiple location paths.
Right. Then that'll have to become a proper parameter or array of parameters in the join response. Yeah, you're right. Any other issue? We can start propose something along these lines, considering also Jim's comment.
So just do you think it's going to simplify something, or is it going to make things more complex at the end? I think that's the big question we should think about.
Of course, it becomes a little bit more complex also to parse, but not in a crazy way, I think.
Yeah, no parsing. I think it's reasonable. I think it's more handling what Jim just raised, or this kind of scenarios. I think it's. I'm not worried about the parsing, and also it's very current that we have a binary things and that we move that to arrays. So.
Oh well, we have arrays already around.
Yeah. Okay.
Probably what is now a spare parameter would become an array of those parameters, and what is now an array can become an array of arrays.
Yeah.
Just saying.
So what does the working group think? Is it a good thing, or is it really, really bad?
If we don't have this, you need to get a token, join a group, then get another token for joining another group, and so on. So this is what we want to avoid, essentially.
I think that you don't need to do that. I think you can get a token and join a group and join a group and join a group and join a group. That token can cover multiple groups.
Okay, you need to have indicated all those groups in scope.
Yeah, but that's not a big deal because
Right.
that's already an array.
Right. It's about that.
I think that's a lot more difficult. I think that's a lot simpler than saying we want to be able to well, we're going to try to make 5 joins at the same time. And okay, now we have to deal with some of them succeed, some of them fail. How do we return the correct error information? What do we do with that? That's a little bit more complicated than just the token can cover multiple items.
Yes, and the idea is then to have a single joining request response exchange.
So if I understand right, is this like multiple groups within one KDC, or what is the?
Still one KDC, yes.
Okay. And there is only one. Yeah. Okay. Good.
Okay, then we'll start to sketch something about this too. Okay, point 3 and 4 are related. Starting with 3, there can be cases where the KDC wants to rekey the group using, let's say, advanced rekeying schemes based also on multicast messages to rekey, well, the whole group at once in the ideal case, or subset of group members at once. And that would, of course, require the group members to know the URI path they have to expect getting those multicast messages, as well as the multicast address in the first place. So they need to get, in case, that information from the KDC upon joining, and that will be yet another parameter. So we were thinking, in case this kind of advanced rekeying mechanisms are supported in a group, that the KDC in the joining response can include this information, so that the group members, of course, supporting this in the first place, are ready to get these rekeying messages if they are sent. And in parallel, where point 4 is the other way around, and this is probably more important to support in general, the base solution we are also already indicating in the document is that the KDC rekeys the group, talking to one group member at a time. And to do that, it has to send a unicast message to that member, and then to another member, and so on. And the idea was, in this case, that the group member, upon joining, specifies to the KDC a convenient URI, where it is fine to receive those unicast rekeying messages. So it's kind of mirrored, essentially. And if we have to choose one only to support, is definitely 4, I think. Here also we wanted to check with you if there is any issues you see.
in the case of 4, how tied is this to the core document that we brought up about doing reverse observe? Is this the same thing or is this different?
I haven't thought of that. Sounds different because that's based on multicast responses, while here 4 is about unicast requests from the KDC to the group member, in fact. So it seems the other way around. Probably what you're thinking about seems yet another set of information that the KDC can provide in the joint response to tell the group member what to listen to get what is a multicast response. But so it can be yet another case, actually.
Okay, the reason I asked is because that makes a difference in terms of how I think about this. I'd like to see 3 start as a separate document myself, because I don't know that I understand enough about how it operates with things. And I don't necessarily want it to hold things up.
Do you mean to define the actual additional parameters involved or even the rekeying protocol?
Part of my worry is how much of that information gets sucked into the rekeying protocol itself. So should it be part of the rekeying protocol instead of part of a general solution? So a little bit more discussion about how things operate. I don't necessarily have a problem with folding it into this document. So you don't have to have a full thing. Just this is the section we'd insert into the document. Just so I can think about it with a bit more information around it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, we can start with a placeholder. For now, it was mostly the KDC telling them, I'm using this, I'm going to reach you at that address and URI, please be sure to be reachable there.
Right, but here's the question. Why do I want to implement it today?
Okay. Yeah, sure. It was just to set
No, I understand. You're trying to set yourself up for futureness.
Okay. It was to set the ground for possible KDCs using something like that.
Right.
Because I suppose that the ground has to be set in this document, I guess.
Well, no, it can be set in the first document that creates such a protocol.
Okay.
Because until that document exists, you don't care what those values. You don't need to implement those values.
So they will be there about extending the content of this CBOR map, so to say.
Right.
Okay.
It would be updating this draft, I suppose.
It'd be updating the registry.
Yeah. Yeah, the registry, the joining response. Yeah. Okay, thanks. While 4, I suppose, is instead something we should have here because you'd be directly used already by this draft itself, where we describe a base point-to-point rekeying mechanism.
Yes, I mean, yeah, 4 makes more sense to include in the document. I'm not too sure I see the use case for it, but that's different.
But just one thing, if we're talking about optional parameters, do we have an extension-like mechanisms or?
Well, that would be about registering more parameters in the registry mentioned at point 1, by the way, and telling where they are used, in particular in which message.
Okay, basically someone not supporting it, just ignore it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, they would be totally optional.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, somebody who doesn't support it isn't going to be able to use it because they don't understand the new rekey mechanism. So they're out of luck anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
A question on 4.
Yes.
Yes. So is this saying this is where you can reach me?
Yes, the exact URI to push on the group member the new key material.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, the address is fine. They can talk already because of the session they have. It's mostly the exact resource.
Okay.
Yes, and I think it's the last slide. Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Thank you very much for the feedback.
So do you have everything to move on, or?
Oh yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
These open points, one from before, 2 reviews. Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so good. I like to see the progress with that draft. So, so in terms of planning, how many versions do you expect? So I guess we were gonna have one before Vancouver IETF.
Definitely.
And
one more at least. We may probably start thinking of working group plus call if there are no big issue raised.
Okay.
That's
So
what Francesca mentioned, by the way, in her mail too.
Okay, so that's it's good. So again, one we think it's quite in a stable state. We will have to check whether we want to we want to have the security directory to provide feedbacks on, or and maybe insist on more reviews on that. So that's the way we'd like to move that.
Agree.
Okay, good. So the second presentation, I guess.
Yes, this is a bit easier and shorter, but of course it's very much related. Submitted the same day, just following updates from KeyGroup.com. So next slide, please. Okay, of course, the detailed description here as a profile was also revised, chasing the changes just made in ASK.com. As agreed, in Singapore, we also indicated 8 bytes in size for the two nonces C nonce. RS nonce also used here for proof of possession of the client's private key, and I also have an open point related to this size, but that comes later. Following also comments, I guess, from Jim, we also elaborated more on RS nonce, because of course the normal case is the first approach with the group manager, and this is returned after the token posting, but sometimes that's just not what happens. For instance, if you go for the DTLS profile and you run it so that the token is embedded in the handshake messages itself, in that case, there's of course no RS nonce explicitly returned, and it has to be derived. So we had a separate section describing where the part of the challenge to be mapped to RS nonce comes from. Well, there's the easy case in case it's returned explicitly, or in the case I just discussed before, TLS exporter, so aligned with QTT profile. But we also found another case where the node is actually rejoining and based on a still valid token that is not reposted, of course. And then, well, if they are running a DTLS session, TLS exporter again, if they are using OSCore instead, we are considering a construction that we are also using in another document, the group OSCore profile of ACE. In a different meaning than this one. I know it can be confusing, but that's an actual transport profile of ACE. Of course, we need feedback on this. Jim started to give us something in mail today, and I think we need to discuss more on this in different senses to be more aligned with the MQTT profile when it's about the TLS exporter and about this construction when instead of score is used. Next
Just
slide.
a question. Why do we need to be aligned with MQTT?
I'm thinking especially of the size of nonces,
Okay.
and then on the label allocation. Yeah, otherwise it's probably
Okay.
other than that. Yeah.
Okay, so that's not a big.
And here we are supposed to be constrained, actually.
Okay.
So better to have that in mind. Sure. Then in the Appendix A, where we have a list of requirements from ASCII Group Com, we have, of course, revised them too, and also documented how this profile fulfills the new one introduced in the latest version of ASCII Group Com. Pretty much editorial work. The abstract now, I hope, reflects better the fact that this is a profile of ASCII Group Com. And as I mentioned before, a lot of content, especially from the first two sections, was taken away and moved to ASCII Group Com because it just had general applicability and fits better there. And we also addressed a review we got from Peter right after Singapore that was mostly about other editorial points and clarifications, nothing functional. Okay, and next slide, just as an actual forward pointer to the open points I have on this. And of course, the main next step is keeping changes in KeyGroup.com we also discussed before, and a review we got today from Jim. And I have three open points, and I probably have the answer already from the discussion at the first presentation. So till today, we have this TLS exporter label that it serves the same purpose, actually, in the MQTT profile and here, so generating challenges for signatures. So to start, we talked about defining it, well, there. 6them was very much forward in that sense and reusing it. In fact, right now we are reusing the label from there. But as Jim was mentioning before, and I also agree, it's probably better, shouldn't be a problem for the allocation per se, to define a new label for the very same purpose here in this document. At least it's very specific to this profile and application, but it will be used exactly the same way, essentially.
Is it a comment? Is it preferable that I change the label name to say Exporter A's MQTT sign challenge to make it more application specific?
Yeah, I think we should both have the profile somehow appearing in the label name itself. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I just have I don't know, Jim. It seems to me that there is some constraints on the length of the string. So I have to check that a little bit, but so just make, I mean, I think there is a limit, but I'm not sure. I have to double check.
I think the limit is like the limit of a hash function.
Okay. So that's not a limit.
Names, I mean, suggestions for names are welcome. Otherwise, it sounds obvious to just continue with more dashes and keywords from the profile. I mean, okay, then we'll allocate a new label here then. Okay, second, and this is also related to the none sizes again. We got comments from Ben Kaduk in Singapore on this. 8-byte in size can even be fine as long as we justify why it is okay as is, for instance, as security considerations. I was wondering if whatever we do can be aligned with what the MQTT profile says in this sense. If we can converge on the same kind of reasoning, And other than that, I had a look also to the OSCORE RFC, where Appendix B2 that involves exchanging of nonces for different reasons than building a challenge, and more for deriving a context, of course, makes this kind of consideration and bottom line to find an acceptable trade-off between probability of collision and number of messages required to have repetitions. So I wonder, first of all, if this line of reasoning can be reused here, though the problem is less severe here, I think, and if how much we should synchronize in this with the MQTT profile.
I think that the security analysis is going to be easier if they are pretty closely aligned in terms of how they go about doing things. So we only have to get the security analysis done once. I have a whole lot less problems with collisions here because this is basically, as far as I'm concerned, you could use counters here because the thing to do is to make sure it doesn't look like something you've done recently, and it is time bound, unlike the OSCORE thing where you're deriving a key where you want to make sure you don't get a key collision.
Yeah. So you mean they may even be smaller?
Yeah, but yeah, they could potentially be smaller. This is one of those arguments that I've had with Ecker at times. It's like, well, if I'm doing DTLS, how small can I make the nonce in DTLS? Because it's if I'm deriving a new key and I'm deriving a nonce, well, the nonce is basically just a, am I on the right session?
Mm-hmm.
So we've had all sorts of discussions about, a counter is bad news only because both of us agree that making the nonce predictable in DTLS is probably a bad idea because you might be able to get some information from predictability. But doing something like encrypting a counter and using that for your nonce is probably perfectly fine. We were having these discussions as part of the make lead up. So it's like, if it's time bound, the answers are slightly different than it is not time bound in terms of length. On the other hand, I feel kind of silly about encrypting something that's 32 bytes, a 32 byte value with a 512-bit key.
Personally, 8 bytes looks fine to me, by the way. So I'm not exactly sure of the good considerations and answers we should give to Ben about this.
Well,
So
the answer for MQTT and for this document is different than it is for the OSCORE profile.
Right.
Because
Yeah,
that
we have
was
much less at stake here.
Right?
Well, then an argument can be, if there you are safe with 8 byte nonces, going for that here is super good.
Yeah, no, this is definitely a less strict problem.
Okay.
So we are not looking at reducing this 8 byte size. We are fine with that size.
Right now, seems to me we are fine, but of course, Ben was hoping for some more reasoning behind the choice.
Yeah, sure. But that because in this case, it's more we have more constraints, and my question was more is 8 a fine value?
Say 16 bits between the two of them, I think is fine. 16 bytes between the two of them, I think is fine.
In terms of constraints, not security.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I mean, right now it's as in the OSCOR profile, where there's a discussion of increasing them, but more for the sake of security, actually.
Okay.
And here you don't have that exact security problem.
Mm-hmm.
So probably having that size that the OSCOR profile has now is just fine.
Okay. Yeah, I thought that because we didn't have the same security constraints requirement, we were looking at having a 4 and not 8 or something like that. Or
No, A would be fine.
okay. Okay, good.
Okay, thanks. And last point, which is a bit tricky. While going through the revision of this document and in detail on the RESTful interface, I noticed this. We can send a GET to GroupoScore GID node name, and that's supposed to give me back the common group key material and my own individual key material. So practically my sender ID in this case. Then the way it is defined already in SQL.com, if I instead send a GET to GroupoScore GID, there the point is just to get back the shared key material only. But the way we are practically connecting pieces now is that I perform the two operations, and in both cases I get exactly the same thing. Because in the second case, where I'm not really supposed to get my individual sender ID, I get it anyway, because it's a parameter inside the key map of what I get. And this is not defined in so much details in SQL. It is abstract enough that does not define the content of key. What we do here. So a possible way to, let's say, fix this and keep this consistent anyway would be that in the response from GroupoScore group name, so where I should get from only the shared group key material, I may not include anymore the client ID parameter of key containing my sender ID. And so the purpose and the semantic of the operation would be as we actually want it to be. And we are consistent again. But of course, we create a difference from the case where you get a join response upon joining with a post. Do you see a problem here, first of all? It looked as an inconsistency in intentions to me.
I don't follow it. I don't understand what you're actually saying. I need more details written down someplace.
Okay, I'll prepare a mail.
Yes.
Okay.
You can see it as a minor thing and pretty innocuous. It's just that you have some expectation when sending that request, and you get something that has more, in a sense.
Right.
It's not perfectly aligned with what you intend to do.
By the way, looking at this issue reminded me, I like using the uppercase characters for the things which are not fixed to names. You might want to propagate that back to the other document.
You like it. Okay, excellent.
So what do you like? You like group name and node name?
Being in all uppercase as being things which are not, which are variable names.
Yeah, like
fixed names.
GroupoScore undercase, it's an example literal path segment that in this example is like that. While group name is, well, put there the actual name of the group you have.
So you like non-normative names to be in capital letters.
They're not non-normative. They are. It's not that they are non-normative. It's that they are specific to either a group or an individual.
Yeah. I was just teasing.
Michael, may I check whether I understand the question? Do you ask for the second one when you just query the group name, you get still node specific information and you want to avoid that?
Right, because the intention is to get back only shared group key material, but in the parameter
returning client specific information, and you are asking, should I remove that from the key?
Yes,
Or
only for the response coming back from this.
okay.
Yes.
Is the concern returning more information than needed?
Only from a performance point of view, if you really bother about the size of a sender ready to be sent. And more in general, the way we are defining that method to that resource is getting back the group key material shared with everyone in principle. And instead here, we are including something more, something individual. So I think we are diverging from the intention of the method.
So Marco, for my understanding, why do you get more information than you need?
You are supposed to get only what's common, and that is contained inside key. The problem is that if we don't say anything, now key is including also the sender ID of that node, which is not group shared information, it's individual.
Okay.
So it's more than you were expecting to get. And plus, if you run the toGet, I wrote there, you get back exactly the same thing. That's not the intention, the way we define them in ASCII group com.
Okay.
I'll send the mail anyway, also to collect more feedback and to clarify this a bit better.
From what I see is that it's the only thing that bother you for that. I mean, on the open point. The other one, we know pretty much where to go. That I think you would like to solve before. I mean,
Yeah,
you
sure.
don't really know how to handle. That's okay.
There's a big point in Jim's mail this morning that was also related to the case where the joining node and group manager talks using OSCORE, and you may want to derive new challenges for a rejoin under the same token. That deserves some more discussion also. The text to think about is all in the draft already and in the mail we exchanged today. In general, points Jim's raised in his review are open points.
Okay, so I think that's going to be well. It's a request to read the mailing list and to respond. So we take that point. Is there any slide? Any more slide? No.
No, that was the last one.
So I'm just wondering if anyone got any specific comments or did you think the interim meeting is useful?
I think it is very much.
So I hope it helps to move those documents. Okay, so do you think we should have another one before the Vancouver meeting?
Hard to say for me. I expect updates submitted the week before the cutoff. Hard to have something even before then, I guess.
Yeah, Jim?
I think the only thing that would give us input on an interim meeting is if we need to do some discussions on the profile on the documents currently with Ben, and possibly the PubSub document, the PubSub encryption document from Francesca.
Mm. So
for the OSCORE profile, Francesca and I have looked through the comments from Ben. Francesca done the nits. And yeah, we have proposals for resolving the other comments as well, but we are not. We haven't sent out the answer to Ben, so that comes next week. For the DTLS profile, maybe Olaf knows more, but I think he's not.
He dropped off. Yeah.
He dropped off. Yeah.
So if we are setting an interim meeting, we need to have 2 weeks notice in advance. So the only question I would like to know is that I guess if we have that interim meeting in 3 weeks, so it's not going to be related on the update of the draft we discussed today, that's something we can do in provision also and cancel if all problems are resolved. So it's also one possibility. If you think that's useful, let me know.
I think it makes sense to set one up for the last 2 weeks of February, and we can always cancel it if we don't need it.
Sounds good.
Okay. And by the way, and by that time, I will be probably more efficient in WebEx. Okay, right. So it's something we can do. Any other comments? No. So probably the meeting can be adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much for the feedback.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.